Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to another story time. And boy oh boy, I knew eventually one day I'd be telling this, and here it finally is. But I'm sure you can tell by the title that this is the time I got arrested. Which some of you guys are probably thinking like, man, someone that's no one has been arrested before? And I have to say, it did happen, guys. And here's the tale of how and why I went down. This is easily one of the hardest times I was lacking in my life. And clearly, I wasn't on top of my game and I got caught up here. But before we get into that, let's lay down the basics for this story and video. So this story is dropping as our 25k special as of recent, which I do have to say thank you a ton. 25k is considered to be a pretty huge milestone, most consider it the next huge one after 10,000. And I guess 50,000 is the next one after this, but I'll have special stories rolling out every 1,000 subs. But thank you everyone that's been subscribed and supporting. We've come a long way. And I really do mean this when I say it, even though we've been doing this for years now, I really do feel like we're just starting to get going with some of the things on this channel. I've had a lot of growth personally myself throughout the years, especially this last year as of recent, and I really do appreciate everyone that stuck with me, especially when we had slow moments and I've had to take time off to figure some things out. But it really means a ton to me. You guys add a ton of energy into the process, it's insane. So thank you again, and of course I gotta give you guys more fire content like this story. But now let's actually set this story up and the things leading up to it. So I do recommend you check out the last story we did, which is titled, Possibly the Worst Combo I've Ever Had, where I took LSA and DXN together at a strong dose. This story I'm telling today literally happened the next day after. Which looking back, I did have a bit of an afterglow this day, which this probably played a role in how I acted. I know for a fact that this story paints my attitude at the time with how we were using, which I will address here, but the story before this sets up how my mood was and everything this day. Anyways, I guess we'll start the story off that day when I woke up, which I'm pretty sure I slept in because of the events prior. I woke up in the afternoon this day. Evan had hit me up early, saying that he wanted to smoke, and that he was able to score some medical. He also noted having a bit of an afterglow. And nothing really too eventful happens leading up to all this. Evan picks me up mid-afternoon, and we drive around town and get fried. We didn't really have any plans, but we had been talking about maybe going to this bonfire that was going down. It was some of our friends from school I remember, but Evan really wasn't feeling the vibe for it this night. I remember just trying to convince him and whatnot, but he just didn't think it would be that good. Which we would never find out anyways. But while we were smoking, Evan and I had made a very casual choice to pick up some ecstasy from a friend of ours, Aaron. Now I had no real plans on when to do the sex. And I have to say just picking this up in general shows that I was starting to make some choices that weren't aligning with what I should have been doing. But basically, all the events before this was like some kind of daze looking back at it. I was super chilled and wasn't really in tune with everything going on. And the more fried we got, the more this was set in stone. I was down to do something if Evan was, but the most we were doing this day was chilling on our afterglow. And it's partially the reason we got caught lacking. I remember thinking that these expos were going to be the last things we do before taking a long break though. But who knows how that would have really turned out. And really this casual decision would act as a turning point in my life. In a sense, I feel like the universe steered me in this direction for a reason. So I would become the person I am now. This helped me focus down on certain things in my life and really make some big decisions I would have never made otherwise. This was a wake-up call in many ways. It just made me get a lot of shit straight, especially concerning my path and where I was going in life. But anyways, Evan and I chilled out like I was saying. We casually picked those pills up and were deciding whether to pull out to this bonfire, which we ended up deciding against. There would be more nights, and instead we decided to head in early and chill out. Now, it would have been like 5 or 6 hours since I had picked up those pills. They were tucked away buried deep in my bag, and I was just focused on getting home and knocking out. It was dark out at this point when Evan dropped me off, and everything was like normal. He took the way he always went, and we didn't see any cops or anything. But literally, we're only like a few blocks away from my crib, and out of nowhere, police lights pop on right behind us. It spooked the hell out of us because there wasn't a police car behind us from what we saw. But we quickly realized it was an undercover cop. Evan was like, fuck, it's an undercover. and I remember getting all nervous and shit because we had been boxing the car all day, so we most likely would get searched. But we pull over on a street I've been on many times, right by my crib. It was pretty stupid. I just could have walked back so easily. And the cops waste no time coming up to us. There were 2 of them, and they came up to both our windows. And the thing is, if I had been ready and not so careless just to store the expos deep in my bag like that, we could have easily taken them and avoided what was to come. But I just have to be straight up. I was lacking and just naive at the time. You can say the same about Evan too, I guess, since we literally were just casually carrying around expos in his car most of this day. But not only were we just stupid about it like that, the thing is, it was an undercover cop, so we had no time to get prepared or anything like that. And storing things like I did was also just a bad move. I would always do this before and bury it amongst other things, but after this, I would learn to have it more easily accessible, either in your hand or your pocket, so you can get rid of it if you need to. But when the police are right there and they can see you, you aren't going to have the time or chance really to go through your bag or anything in your car like that. You might, but it is a risk. You're going to take a chance of drawing suspicion, which could escalate things into something else. But thinking back on it now, I don't know, man. Maybe I should have tried to been quick with it and took a chance. But like I've been saying, and I'll keep saying it, man, I was just lacking this night and not on my shit, for a few reasons. I will admit though, part of it was me at the time and who I was, which was somewhat careless. But anyways, these cops come up on each side like I said and start taking our info, and told Evan that they pulled us over because he had an expired sticker. Pretty dumb reason to get pulled over, but the shit happens. So this was just Evan lacking here. He had totally forgotten about it, which does mean we were subject to being pulled over pretty much at any point this day. Also the day prior thinking on it, and other days. People do be lacking with their sticker at times, I know, and sometimes the cops won't give a fuck, but it was also the end of the month, which was just our luck. If you don't know, police officers typically will have a certain quota they have to meet, and as fucked up as it is, this could mean giving out a certain amount of tickets. From what I know, most of the time this is tracked on a month-to-month basis, so in theory, you're more likely to get pulled over near the end of the month. And again, when I look back at this shit, man, it was just fate and some shit we were meant to go through. Some shit to learn and grow from, and influence the course of our lives. But they told us they were gonna run our names, which one cop went back to the car to do this, while the other kinda hung back by us. It was pretty unfortunate also that we got pulled over with 2 officers instead of just 1. Again, fate at play. Now I will say there was a moment when the cop by us walked back to the cop car to say something, which I maybe could have acted real fast and grabbed the expos, but I was pretty much frozen out just worried with Evan and wasn't sure if I should risk it, hoping they would just let us on our way. I was worried about getting busted though, or just getting caught doing something else if I did that, since one of the cops was literally close outside. But a couple more minutes go by and they have a squad car pull up. They tell us they smell the weed and that they're going to search the car. We don't argue of course and just get out, since they already got Evan on a ticket and it would have been pointless to. But we got out and they pat us both down pretty thoroughly, and then have us stand by the car that just pulled up. The cop that pulled up told us to sit against the car with both hands out against it. And this dude was just talking to us casually, like it was just another night. He was asking like what school we went to and all this casual stuff, trying to be cool with us. But the cops proceed to search Evan's whip, and eventually I see they make their way to my bag. And at this point, man, I just knew I was fucked and there was no way out, unless they just somehow didn't find it. But it was tucked away deep in my bag, wrapped in this paper I remember. And the pills themselves I remember had a Superman logo on them, and it just looked like it was a drug the way I had it stashed away. So it's like there was no way they wouldn't think it was some pills, and not something like candy or some garbage. But they came up to me and asked me if it was my bag, since it was on my side, and what the pills were. I did say it was my bag, but I didn't know about any pills or what they were. And they said they found a couple pills in my bag, and I just repeated that I didn't know about them. They looked at each other, and one of them said it looked like Ecstasy, a Schedule 1 substance. And they asked me a few more basic things, same thing with Evan, and we basically denied it was ours. And I will say, part of what I said here was reason enough for them to bring me in, I guess, but I'll bring that up later. But I remember they ended up talking with each other and decided they needed to arrest someone for possession of an illegal substance. And because it was in my bag, the unanimous decision was to make the arrest on me. Which, just super fucking shitty, man. And I wanted to do something so bad, just waiting and going through this, just something to change the situation. But we were just way too deep in the shit at this point. So I just had to go along basically with what the police were saying at this point. I remember Evan was telling me that he had totally forgotten about the pills, but saying that he knew he fucked up with his plates. He was mainly concerned for me though, because of what would be coming up for me. Of course you don't want to see the homie get sent to jail. But they came up and basically started reading my rights as they handcuffed me. Which I had to say, being handcuffed is pretty discomforting, especially when they put me into the squad car. But they got all my things out of Evan's car, and then they called up a tow truck because Evan's car would now be impounded since I was being arrested on a drug charge. So that was shitty for him. He had to call up his sister to come pick him up. But as for me, man, I was sitting in the back of the squad car. Which, this wasn't my first time in a police car. I had gotten a ride from police one time when I was way younger. But sadly this time, I was in there with cuffs now. Which I had to say, it's uncomfortable as hell trying to sit in the back with handcuffs. Standing you can at least let your hands rest, but in the car, they get all in the way and bend all stupid because of the cuffs. And this took like another half hour or so, because even more cops came and they searched his car further, opening the trunk and every which place you might think to look. And here's the stupid thing about this, they didn't even find the weed we had left over. We had like an eighth left and they totally missed it. Evan put it in the side door in a blunt wrap, and I guess they thought it was empty or something. So that's just really stupid. But I'm just chilling there and watch as Evan's car gets towed away. But eventually the cops come back to the car and we finally start making our way to the station. I remember just wanting to get out of that situation, wishing that I never had to take this type of ride through town. But I have to admit, I was somewhat leveled throughout this. I was really just focused on doing what I had to do to get out of this situation and make sure I never end up in it again. I did have nerves going, of course, because I was being arrested, but I just had to do what I had to do at the same time. And I have to also admit, these guys kind of looked like they regretted doing what they were doing. But at the same time, fuck these guys, because they didn't have to escalate things like this. Like I remember one of the cops telling me, maybe the county will just give me a misdemeanor since I just turned an adult. Which, that's the thing too at the time of this, I was only 18. If I was just a year younger, this would have played out so much differently. But I was getting charged as an adult. Once you're of age, it doesn't matter anymore. But anyways, I remember pulling into the station and then getting out and going into the parking lot. The cops were mainly talking to each other. But we go inside and it's like we were the only ones at the station at the time. They cut me to a bench and eventually came to get my fingerprints and handprints. And then they let me give a call. So I called on my mom and told her about the situation. Of course she was disappointed, and it didn't help me feel any better having to tell her that. But I said I had no idea what they were going to do with me yet, and that I'll try and give a call once I figure things out. Just disappointing her with this was probably the worst of it all. And afterwards, this would change the outlook and treatment from my parents in a lot of ways. Especially from my stepfather at the time. But we'll get into that more later. Anyways, they sent me down for questioning, which wasn't anything eventful. They tried to see if I had any valuable information to offer, and said if I did, they could cut me a deal. For one, I'm not a snitch, and two, I didn't have anything useful to give them. But they tried to figure out how the pills got in my bag, and I said I didn't know. Maybe someone put them there when I wasn't looking. But they said the pills would be tested as they were suspected to be Ecstasy, a Schedule I substance. Which they kind of fucked up with this, because essentially, a lot of this would just be a huge waste of time. I really just feel like I ended up with some bad luck and some unlucky people this day that really didn't have my best interest in mind by any means. But the questioning doesn't last very long, and I get put into holding for like an hour or two. There was like one lady there, I think a secretary or something, and eventually some older lady was brought in. I remember this lady saying she was in there for drunk driving. She was saying she had been to jail one other time like 30 years back, in like her 20s. And I don't remember her full story, but basically she was fighting with her husband or something, and didn't even seem to really care that she ended up getting arrested. She was able to bum a cig off the secretary, I remember, and smoked it while in holding. She was super thankful for that, because once you get into the county jail, you won't have the chance to smoke anything. But eventually they come back for me and take me to the county jail, which was just down the street. I try to remain optimistic, because that one cop kept saying, maybe they'll just do a misdemeanor and not process me. But sadly, as you know with this video, things did not go my way. We get into county, and it's like a shit show office of people going around. And it's like 1 in the morning. We go to this desk area, and they start discussing my situation. And I remember the dude in charge was just not having it. The one cop was saying I was only 18, it was my first charge on something, and that it was a small amount. But he was like, nope, he's of age on an illegal drug charge. We gotta admit him and charge him with a felony. And that decision was that. No empathy at all here. You don't get any say in this shit really. They really don't take account for who you are or anything like that. Especially where I grew up in the Chicagoland area. But they start to admit me, which I have to say, they are just kinda naturally rude, as you can imagine. And I can understand this to a degree. I mean, why would you want to treat criminals like they're some customers or something? But then again, like 95% of the people I would deal with moving forward wouldn't even know what my charge was. They would have no clue what you were in there for. So you get grouped along with everyone else and treated the same way. Which I have to say, it's a much different story when it's a victimless crime, like simple drug possession. I believe all small amounts of drug possession should be decriminalized everywhere, especially when there's no evidence with intent to sell. Someone wanting to take a drug as something is mainly based on personal interest, and there's no intention to cause harm to others or society. When it's in large amounts, like someone moving large amounts of cocaine or fentanyl, I can better see how this is suited as a crime. But then that brings up the idea of who should actually be supplying the drugs in the first place. But we won't get into that today. There really just isn't fair treatment for drug users when it comes to simple possession. If you look at things like psilocybin, LSD, cannabis, they remain a Schedule 1 substance and have been for a long time. But these are some of the most safest and interpersonal substances you can have. And to say it's along the same lines as something like cocaine is an overstatement. There isn't a clear, fair, concise ruling when it comes to these situations. At the very least, I think drug users should be grouped somewhere outside of the jail system, which the intent sometimes is simply to process these types of cases into a drug program. But the thing is, jailing isn't necessary or warranted really, because this behavior isn't severe, it's harmless to others. I don't think they should be grouped with people who are committing assault, robbery, shootings, fraud, and all these other types of crimes where someone else is actually suffering from their actions. Which I would meet a handful of different types this night, you'll just see. Anyways, back to the story. A lot of this experience was mainly just me waiting for them to process me or they grew to the next step. Which, in other words, it was boring. And that's what you'll find in jail with most people. There isn't entertainment. There is just you existing amongst other inmates while the police treat you like a bunch of bitches. And boy, is it one hell of an existence to go through. But when they processed me, they collected my items I had on me and took note of that, which I just had my bag, my phone, and some money. I remember the cops were trying to make some rude remarks as we went through this, but it really just went over my head and I paid them no mind. But after this, next thing to collect would be my clothes, which they would be kind of stupid about this and allow people to wear certain shirts or their own shorts, which I feel like I could have at least qualified for one of these, but they made my ass take all my shit off and wear their rags. And here's also the thing, they took me to this area where no one was, and it was 2 cops. They made me bend over and cough, to see if I was trying to smuggle something in. Which this jail I went to is known for bringing in a lot of druggies, a lot involved with drugs like heroin or crack. And there has been people on the inside selling this stuff, which the way to do this is to shove drugs up your rectum. They don't do a full cavity search because it is in prison, but still, this is the level they take things. Which, being honest, no one warned me about this shit, so it was unexpected for me. And I do have to say, this is where things began to feel like it was dehumanizing. I mean, most people aren't going to be very comfy with showing 2 random cops your asshole spread while bent over, you feel? And just the conditions that follow this do continue with this dehumanizing tone. You get treated like a criminal, which I guess to the system and all these cops, that means it makes it okay to treat you like an animal pretty much. But next, they gave me these thread cloth clothes basically. They were brown, green, and loose on me. Which the underwear they gave me was also like the same exact material as the shirt. It was kinda stupid. Then they gave me socks and no shoes. Which the whole place was this dirty ass concrete. And then from what I remember, they took my picture from there. Which man, I just couldn't believe my shit was gonna be posted. I would see my booking online after this. Like damn, I've looked at this site multiple times for other people, but never would I thought I was gonna be seeing myself on there. And for obvious reasons guys, I'm not gonna show my mugshot here. I haven't shown myself at all yet, and I don't know when that will be, but most definitely not through a mugshot. Anyways, they told me I would get a hearing the next day during video court, since it would be the weekend and the courts were closed. They had me wait like another half hour in another holding area before actually moving me somewhere. And I remember when I got in there, it was kinda loud from the guys. Not like anything wild, but there were just some guys being loud. Talking loud, some singing songs, rapping, doing whatever. And hearing this actually gave me a bit of relief, because I knew now I would actually be around some people I could talk to. But before going in, they gave me a blanket and that was it. You don't get any pillow. And this is a thin ass blanket man, like thin as a shirt. Then I tried to ask about getting my contacts taken care of, because I had them in all day at that point, and since I would be staying, I needed some place to store them. But let me just tell you, they don't give a fuck about that shit. Any of your little bullshit needs, they don't want to deal with. I remember trying to get some help, asking about it like 4 different times to different people, and never did a solution come. They would just be like, oh alright, like they were gonna do something about it, but never would anything happen. But anyways man, after some more processing stuff, I finally make my way to my cell. And here's the thing, this isn't like a bunk where you share a cell with someone else or a few people. You only actually get that if you're going to be jailed there for an extended period. I remember it was something like 2 weeks plus. So when you just get booked and have to go through a hearing, court and all that yet, they're literally looking to do the bare minimum. And I feel like a big part of this is a resource thing, with just the space and a few other things. But still, it was really goofy how it would be. So basically each cell was like this. First thing is, there are no bunks, no beds. The room has this one bench area, and it isn't even a bench. It's like this concrete indent along the wall where you could sit, which it could fit one person for sleeping. And the rest of the room is just this dirty ass concrete floor with one toilet in the back, a sink, and that's pretty much it. And this room was the size of a medium-sized bathroom pretty much. And to each room, they would fit around 4 to 6 people, sometimes more depending on how many people were booked. And I'm getting into this cell, and it had to be around 2 in the morning. And the cell I went into, there were people trying to sleep. And just like 3 or 4 cells down, there were some dudes turning up, rapping and whatnot, laughing, and just having a good time. So different vibes going on. But I get into this cell, and there's like 4 other guys in here. All of them were trying to get some sleep. A couple woke up and looked at me, just acknowledged me, and went back to sleep. Which I could tell right away, you weren't getting quality sleep in this place. They left these bright ass fluorescent lights on the whole time, and there was no windows. Even the cell door wasn't barred. It was a thick door with only a small window to see through. But I sat around these guys and just sat down feeling tired. Only one guy could sleep on this uncomfortable ass concrete bench, and everyone else would sleep on the ground. The place was cold as hell on top of this, and the blanket and clothes would barely help. But what made things most difficult was that they didn't give you a pillow. So you had to use your hands or lay your head down on the ground, if you could that is. With that many people, you couldn't even stretch out your whole body out. So a very shitty ass situation for sleep they put you through. And I couldn't imagine how they put some through this for days, a week, or even possibly longer. But like I said, I was tired, and in my mind, I wasn't about to let the system get to me. Even though I messed up big time and I was deep in the shit at this point, you just can't break and let them have their way completely. I had to focus on what I had to do in other words, and I was just really trying to do the least amount possible in there. So even with having to sleep on this cold ass floor, with 4 other dudes I never met in this cramped room, it being noisy, and the fact that I was spending the night in jail for the first time in my life, I was able to go to sleep for a bit over a couple hours. I woke up for breakfast time, which is at like 5 a.m. or like 5:30 from what I remember. They literally have a guy come and bang on every door beforehand. So you get pretty much woken up whether you want to or not. But we all get up and I start to talk to these guys a bit. I'm pretty sure I didn't meet anyone in here under like 23 or 24 the whole time I was here. But this is how it would go generally with most people. Other inmates are curious as to why you're in there. I mean, it's natural. Like, why'd you end up here? And I feel like it almost set the tone for what kind of person you were. Or in this case, what kind of criminal. And no one but me in here was in for a drug charge. At least that I talked to or heard about, besides for the females. I know there was this one lady for smuggling something super ridiculous. I think like 50 pounds of heroin. The guys I talked to had various reasons as to why they were in there. But 60 to 70% of them had to do with some kind of assault or violence. The rest seemed like robbery, fraud, or gun possession charges. I remember one of the dudes in my cell had a gun charge, and this dude specifically asked me if I came in high off something. Just because of how out of it I was and how tired I looked. He thought I was off some opiates or a benzo or something. Then 2 others had assault charges, and the other guy, I don't remember what he did. But really, these guys in the cell, they were pretty chill, especially compared to the people I meet after this when I'd have to go in for video court. These guys were all in their mid-20s, so there was some relatability and understanding. They were telling me about all kinds of things with the system, because a couple of them it was like their second or third time going through that process. Which, when I told them my situation like that, they knew I would be alright at the end of the day. That the bond amount shouldn't be anything too ridiculous, and they agreed it was really stupid I was in like that over a couple pills. But the system is the system, man, and it's always good if you have people who will support you if you ever end up in that situation. Which I feel terrible every time I think back on this because of how it made my mom react, and how it kind of changed her perspective on me and what I was doing with my life. Just disappointment, man. Shit really sucks. But anyways, not to get off track, they come around for breakfast like 10 minutes after they woke everyone up. And to be honest, I don't remember the full meal, but it was very laughable. I think it was just a slice of bread with butter, and then a piece of fruit or something. I think a fruit cup. I just remember the bread being dry as fuck. But I only stayed in there for like another hour or so, just having small talk before an officer came to get me. Which, this was the same guy who searched my asshole. And I would see this guy mostly throughout this. It was like he was assigned to my case or some shit, but it might have just been coincidence. He was there with me through booking and when I left the place. But anyways, they take me for a medical checkup with the doctor, which I tell them of my allergies, and the doctor just writes down the basic information. And of course, this isn't a super swift process, and it involved with me waiting for a while. Then after this, I believe they had to finish registering me into the jail, so I had to wait in another area for like another hour or two before this happened. And the whole time you're out of the jail cell, they put handcuffs on you. And while you're waiting, they'll handcuff you to something in the room. Basically, they take no chances for any fuck shit to go down, which this jail is known for being rougher. But anyways, as you can imagine, this shit is just really boring as hell. It's like I was back in school without a phone, stuck in in-school suspension, or some shit like that, just waiting for the shit to be over with. And that's what I knew what this really was anyways. It was just a matter of time. At the same time, this time was a lesson, an experience I was meant to go through. I was meant to take this in, and it was pretty significant the way it would impact my life. Anyways, I saw how time could just eat away at your mental state in this place, when really the main thing you're being exposed to is bad treatment, poor conditions, and all types of criminals. I think the biggest thing that was bothersome for me was just how much lack of care there is, which I can kind of see if you've been dealing with this situation and all kinds of people. There are some motherfuckers out there that will go crazy and act out, or act sneaky, or whatever, and people can really be a danger. But sadly, this attitude I feel like can enable that behavior more and make matters worse where rationalization should be given. I was really just given this view of how bad the system can be naturally, and how it can dehumanize people. All your rights feel thrown out the window, and you get treated like you're the scum of the earth. And talking to the people in there, seeing their situation somewhat unfold and getting glimpses of how their lives were, it can really lower your standards and the bar you place on what is right and wrong in your life. Also things to be grateful of, and the level of respect you have not only for others, but most importantly, yourself. And here's the thing too that's pretty fucked up, and shows how they really just don't give a fuck about your situation, at least concerning your immediate needs. Everything is a whole ass process basically. But I tried telling the police multiple times about my ASD, and how being in such a social situation can have a negative impact if things go the wrong way. And I'm just trying to tell my situation, and it's like when stuff like that comes up, it's like they don't want to hear any of it. Like they just turn one ear the other way and act like you said nothing. So you would really have to try and have to exert yourself. And you'll be lucky if they consider your needs, let alone do something about it. So you can imagine, if someone had really bad social anxiety or something, especially if you're like withdrawing off something like benzos, how someone like that can really struggle to get the things they need. Simply put, I feel like if you have a mental condition of some sort, you can be victimized heavily by simply just being in that kind of situation. You can easily be misunderstood. Like I said, most of the workers in there, no matter if it be the guards, the doctors, secretaries, or whoever, they all treat you like you're a scum criminal who can't be trusted no matter what. It's most likely how they get trained, and that if you ended up in there, you most definitely deserve what was happening to you. Which is just super fucked up to think about, because thing was, it wasn't prison, it was jail, and I had just been admitted. A lot of us had trials to go through to see if we were even guilty or not, but every cop in there treats you like you are guilty, and there's no benefit of the doubt naturally. So it's just fucked, man, and you can just tell that by how the lack of treatment, the lack of care and respect, it leads to resentment from the inmates. And nobody really wants to treat anybody well in result. It just feels like you're heavily pressured into sides, and it's a really messy situation. Anyways, after I get processed and all that, I go back to the cell for like not even 5 minutes before they pull me for video court. And this video court process was probably the longest process from what I remember. It lasted something like 3 hours just to get through like 20 people. And they had all of us in this room for the longest time before anything actually started, at least an hour. And of course it was separated by gender, so I was in with, I want to say, like 9 or 10 guys. And everyone was going around and talking about what they did to get up in there. And a majority of it was assault, like people getting into these stupid ass fights pretty much. I remember this one dude said he was fighting with his uncle, and he ended up body slamming him into the ground, then whacked his head with a baseball bat and cracked his skull or whatever. Like just ridiculous. Like you could tell this dude needed to calm down, getting too drunk or whatever. Then I remember this one dude was telling us he was stealing shit out of cars in the parking lot at this casino in town. He said he'd be snooping around that bitch, just seeing what cars would be unlocked. Because you might be surprised how many people will be careless about this type of thing. He said he'd find things like phones, tablets, laptops, cash, and whatever he could get his hands on. And this dude was almost like 60, I remember, and he had a record of stealing stuff in the past already. But eventually, the staff caught his ass. Then there were like 2 or 3 dudes in there for credit card fraud, which I have no idea what these guys did. Maybe they stole some cards, used some fake names, could have been a lot of things. Then some guys had gun related charges, and also a lot of people would have charges related to not having a license, probably from past DUIs. But you get the picture here. And I have to say a lot of these guys here seem very emotionally involved with their situation, especially the ones who were in there for assault. These dudes would get loud and pissed at the police, like complaining and making sly remarks to the max, which probably didn't help us very much, but nothing was happening anyways. I remember they asked me what I got booked for, and they all looked at me like I was some kid and that I shouldn't be in there. Part of it was just my presentation at times, but I mean, I was just barely 18 also. So literally a baby for the adult system. And I hadn't been to juvie or anything like that, so I was really just thrown into it. But they told me what to do pretty much, and that was cool. And everyone said I would be fine, since it was only my first charge, and I was young. And I do talk about these people like they're criminals, but at the end of the day, we all are people. And people are caught up in their own bullshit, and we struggle. And some don't make the best moral decisions, whether that be on a personal level or indirectly towards society. But we're still people, man. We all still had things and people we care about. And I will say, empathy was shown among inmates in my situation. In the moment, there's a sense of togetherness and people wanting to see the best for you. And that they want you to beat your case and get out of there. Which, speaking of getting out, man, I remember like 2 or 3 people being discharged before me. One was super early, like right after breakfast I think. And I remember he had only got there and it was only like an hour. So I'm pretty sure Buddy had the hookup without even knowing what his bail was. But anyways, basically, no one's in there to make things harder for you. Unless you're like fucking around, bugging someone or something. The fact that they're in jail to begin with is enough shit already. And people don't want to put others down even more. The cops did that enough already with all the rude comments and treatment. So naturally, there was an uplifting attitude towards the other inmates. But anyways, we chatted for a while, and eventually the judge comes on. This dude was eating lunch. I remember we got to watch the court session on video and hear it, but this dude was wiping his face with a napkin. It was this old judge too, like some guy in his late 60s or something, with all gray hair. Like just ridiculous. We were basically waiting for this dude to finish his sandwich. Whole time I'm just in this bitch thinking, come on motherfucker, I just want to go home already. I just want to get the hell out of here. Let me get some actual fucking clothes on, eat some real food, and do what I gotta do and never end up in this situation again. But anyways, they started with the females, and we all got to hear their charges and see them go on camera and all that. It wasn't anything too eventful by any means, but it is when you're stuck in there, bored out of your mind. Basically, I'll just say now that I never once talked to a judge like that about my situation, or explained to them anything about me really, or what happened. Not this first time, which somewhat makes sense, because you're just setting up your case still, but it wouldn't happen the following times I went either, which I went to court like 5 or 6 times total after this, but I'll explain that shortly. Anyways, they don't really give a stage to present yourself or what's up. You would really have to butt your way in to try and say something. I didn't say shit, because honestly, I didn't have shit to say. I just needed the information they gave me, and my bail set. I knew I would figure things out by the time my actual case came up. I remember though, a few people tried to say some things, and they really had to interrupt them, which the judge wouldn't be very cooperative. Like he would give a short answer, and try hard as fuck not to incite a response, and just jump back into whatever they were talking about. And if you're wondering who was talking, it was the judge and then the state representatives, like the lawyers and shit for the state. Because with criminal activity like this, it is you versus the state. So again, this can come off all as very intimidating and confusing if you've never been through it or know much about it. I mean, I've had friends go through this process and tell me things, but you never really know until you go through that shit. But in the middle of it, I was called up by the judge, and here's how it played out. It was like no longer than a minute total. But basically, the state told the judge my situation and what happened. How the cops pulled us over for the plates, how they searched the car, found the pills, which was suspected to be MDMA, a Schedule I substance. They mentioned I was a first-time offender, but saw it fit I should be charged with a Class 3 felony, which there are like 4 or 5 classes of felonies you can be charged with from what I know. And basically, number 1 is the worst offense, so 3 put me somewhere in the middle. I don't know all the details, but obviously, you don't want a felony charge on your records. Most jobs won't hire you. But along with this, the state requested to have a bail of $50,000, which that would have sucked ass, but the judge saw that was high and he lowered it to $20,000. And if you don't know how bail works, you have to post 10% of the total bail amount to get out. So in other words, it was $2,000 for me to get out. And there's a lot of terms that follow for the money, but basically, it's like a trust that you won't fuck off after you get released and you follow through with your case. But I knew $2,000 would be doable, and I just had to let my mom know what's good with that. So after that, I went back to the room and they finished up the cases. After this, we get taken for lunch and for phone calls, which they didn't drag about thankfully, since we were late for lunch to begin with. And they honestly hooked me up with food. Reason being is because when I said I had allergies. I don't think I mentioned this before, but I do have a nut allergy, and I told the doctor this. Now, I don't think anyone else was eating nuts in their sandwich, but for whatever reason, I got 2 sandwiches instead. And these sandwiches were literally just 2 slices of bread with a slice of cheese in between. like so garbage. Then I remember we got another bitch ass fruit cup, and then a small fucking thing of cornbread. That's your lunch. Literally, it was like some shit you would get at the school cafeteria, but somehow even worse. Which is kind of fucked I have a comparison for this, but I shit you not, the quality of school lunch food is pretty much the same as the food we got in there. But with the food at jail, the portion sizes were like half of what you would get at school. Like literally this lunch would just be a snack. Thankfully at least, I got 2 sandwiches out of it because of an allergy finesse, but still, there was only like one other person besides me with an allergy. So everyone just had one little bitch ass sandwich. But I didn't even start to eat because while they handed out the food, we were also making phone calls. And this was kind of like our rec time too, because they let us out in this little area by the phones with no handcuffs on. They also actually had a TV on in this area set up. Of course it was just the news channel, but I guess it was better than nothing. But they had like 3 cops watch over us, making sure no one does anything funny. And they had those round mirrors in the corner, so it would be really difficult to do anything out of line. Cameras too, of course. But anyways, I was finally able to make a call to my mom, which they charge anyone money to pick up the line at this point. But she answered and I told her what's up and how much I needed to get out. She didn't hesitate at all and sent my stepdad to come get me. She asked me a few things, thought I would have a rough time, but I told her about it and how it wasn't really the worst, but obviously not somewhere you want to be for an extended time period. But we chatted for like a minute or two and that was that. I was like one of the last calls, and afterwards they brought everyone back to their cells. And I hadn't even had the chance to touch my food yet, so they let me bring it back with me. I ended up giving one of my sandwiches to one of my cellmates, which he was thankful for. I knew they needed it more than me. They asked me right away if my peoples were coming to get me out. Because the thing is, body language is huge in this place. And if you're going to be locked up for a while, it would highly benefit you to be able to read body language well so you don't get screwed over. But they could tell I was a bit relieved and okay with the state of things. Which if someone is acting like that, it's most likely because they're getting out. But we talked for a little bit, and I only stayed like another hour. Which you do not know how damn relieving it was when I heard the cops come to my cell and say I was getting bailed out. Like I was just in my head thinking, finally man, I'm no longer going to be contained in this bitch. We're going to get back on with life and make shit happen. And to be honest, it was kind of motivating. But there would be a lot of bullshit along the way I would have to handle. But anyways, it takes them like a damn hour just for them to get me out. And I'm not going to explain everything here, but I got everything I came back with. So all my clothes, my phone, and some money. And they were still being rude as fuck along the way, but I didn't give a fuck since I was getting out. So anyways, they dragged, but eventually I step outside and I look for my stepdad at the time. He was in the parking lot and I just hopped in the truck. This man did not say a word to me, like nothing. All I knew was he wasn't very happy with the situation. And if you want a better idea of how things can get with this guy, I highly recommend you go back and check out the story of what it was like to grow up with an alcoholic or something like that. I think it was called My History with Alcoholism. I described how bad he can get with his drinking, so it was only a matter of time before he would explode. The beer was like his ignition. But it's like a 10-15 minute ride back to my crib. I see my mom, and man dude, this was like the most ever I see my mom disappointed with me. It really just changed the perspective of who she thought I was and the kinds of things I would involve myself with. In other words, I would say she just thought I was a much more innocent kid. Truth is, I was just good at keeping that part of my life hidden from them. Like, they knew I smoked a few times before, but the fact that it was ecstasy was just something different to them. And this kind of changed my family's perspective on me too in a sense. I remember my mom said when I told her I was in jail, she thought it would be for weed. But when I said it was ecstasy, that's a big part of what did it. Because now, she knew I had pills on me, and I was most likely taking them. And when you open yourself up to that fact, you cross a certain line. So they suspect that, if it's ecstasy, what else could they be taking? It's just a very messy situation. But my mom wasn't trying to like discipline me or anything. She gave me the impression that this was something that was going to be up to me. At the end of the day, I make certain decisions that impact the course of my life. And I do have to say, it was probably my mom's influence the most that made me reconsider a lot of what I was doing at the time. And made me rethink how I was acting and what I was actually doing with these substances. It was a sign from the universe, a redirection to the path I'm supposed to be following. It sucked, man, but it was needed growth for me. But anyways, my phone had been dead and I put it back on the charger right away when I got back. I talked to my mom a little bit, but she really wasn't in the mood to chat or anything, obviously. This was something that was going to take some time. I remember how refreshing it felt to be back home and just outside, and just realized how the world can take you away from that in one night. And I just kept thinking about all these other people that end up in there, and how some don't have help, are the ones that did and are just going through it again and again. Like, you see some people in there that have shot people, that have hurt people with little to no remorse, that have tried to play the system in some way, but end up getting caught over and over again. And when you get into it too deep, and whether or not you come to your senses to try and fix your life, it may already be too late for an easy switch. You're too far deep in the hole. It sucks, man, because I can tell a lot of people are victims to the situation. And some just don't have the right guidance or support to do what they need to do in their lives to better it. So with all that in mind, I was grateful just to be able to sit in my room, open my journal up, and really just think about my purpose in this life. It really made me appreciate things and want to do better overall. And my mom would eventually notice this with time, a certain kind of maturity. But anyways, my phone eventually powered on, and I opened it to a bunch of different texts and calls from friends and family looking out for me. I remember a couple sent me the mugshot they took of me, which just ridiculous, man. But anyways, I hit up the homie Marcel as he was trying to get a hold of me, and then Evan. Marcel happened to be free and he came over. Of course the bro just wanted to talk and see how I was doing. We ended up driving over to Evan's crib and talked there. Evan told us about how they impounded the car and all that, and how he had to drop like $700 or $800 just to get it back. Just crazy how much they be taxing you for these situations. But we just had a casual chat. They really wanted to know the details of it all, and it felt weird. It was a nice day out and everything, with the sun bright, but it just didn't feel real in a sense at the same time too. And just kinda shitty also, because I still had my case to deal with. I had to show up for court in less than a week's time. Which, let me briefly explain what comes of this case, as I'm sure you're curious. Basically, the judge stated that every time I appear in court, I had to take a drug test. So that meant I had a drug test later that week, which wouldn't really matter for your first one, since barely any time has gone by. But I show up for court the first time. I don't have money for an attorney or anything, so I'm eventually given a public defender. But basically, I'm like one of the last ones to go up, of course, the first time. I just go to the stand and they state information about my case. I didn't even say if I pled guilty or not. I think they just assumed so based on my bond. But I didn't even say one word the whole time. But they scheduled my next court date in like 25 days. And for whatever reason, my case ended up getting delayed again and again. But I would show up in court like every 2 or 3 weeks. So I was pretty much getting drug tested consistently. Which this courthouse is known for being strict, with metal detectors, no phones allowed or any technology, you're patted down, etc. And for the piss test, someone's watching you through a mirror, so you pretty much have no chance of using fake piss unless you shot it up beforehand. But I got clean for this. I had to do a huge detox on cannabis. I probably mentioned this before in a video, but I'll make another video going into detail about it. But to keep it simple, I had strong troubles eating and sleeping for like a week after this. And always after each drug test, I would always smoke a little bit, just to get a little taste in with it. And always after, I would detox hard as fuck. I remember drinking a shit ton of cranberry juice, lime juice, lemon juice, and a ton of water during this period, especially before the test. They didn't lab test it, so it really didn't matter if your piss was like water or not. But it was annoying. I really just wanted to smoke weed during this all, as I didn't have problems with hard drugs. And even with that X, I was looking to use it therapeutically for my ASD. But my public defender ended up switching like halfway through the process. I remember the first one was telling me I would most likely get my charge reduced once my case gets processed if I did something like drug court, probation, or a similar drug program. Which, man, fuck that shit, bro. I was just thinking how fucking dry my life would be without cannabis. Because I just love cannabis, man. It's the shit and my number one substance of all time. For me, it's like water. And what sucks about it is the test times and how it can linger in your body. Man, if it was ecstasy I was taking, you can get away with that so easily. But passed by like 3 or 4 months of me being in and out of court, whether to get an actual update or not, we finally hit a turning point. It was like the middle of January, and we went to another court date. I normally took a piss before court, and this was like the one time I wasn't able to piss. I normally hydrated heavily and pissed once or twice beforehand, but it just wasn't coming yet. I had to go upstairs for my case, and the guy said I could come back after. But I go to my case and up to my public defender. I was one of the first names called this day. I remember the judge asked me if someone came with me that day, and he wanted me to point out my stepdad for whatever reason. Which I remember, man. You share this court with inmates from the jail and other areas. And what they do is chain them all up with like one big chain and a ton of cuffs. So like everyone's hands were cuffed along with one of their ankles. They do that, I think, because it's easier to escort that many around the courthouse. And when it's one of their turns, they uncuff them, and a guard will walk up to the stand with them. Like I said, they don't be fucking around here. But like everyone stared at my stepdad, and then the judge continued on. Which I had like 3 or 4 different judges handle my case through this. So it shows there's really no personal attachment when it comes to these cases. There isn't a lot of sympathy for the drug users. But basically, the judge stated that the case and all my charges were being dropped due to lack of evidence. He didn't really explain this, but my public defender did after we finished. But with the pills, they eventually made their way to the lab. And guess what? It wasn't MDMA. It was some research chemical alternative, something else I'll never know. Which I hid at the homie, the one I got the pills from, and he didn't know himself. He wasn't testing them and got them off someone else. But man, just having to go through jail this night, have my family change their outlook on me and treat me different, then having months of drug testing in court just for the pills not to be real MDMA. And also my defender told me partially why I went to jail that night was because of certain things we said. Which, this just goes to show you really don't want to say shit and as little as possible when dealing with the police in this kind of situation. But this event really changed my life in many ways, and really gave me some perspective on things. I actually made some big life choices when I was going through court. Choices I'll talk about in some future stories. A ton will go down in these upcoming months after the night in jail. Some of my biggest trips ever and life experiences yet. But I feel like the universe was on my side, and I went through all of this for a reason. And I feel like it was to experience something that's always going on. But I think we're going to end it here. This story's going to be long as fuck, I already know. But tell me if you guys have any similar experience dealing with the system, going to jail, or whatever. As drug users, many of us are susceptible to being criminally charged if the conditions are right. So this should naturally be a concern for all of us. At the end of the day, looking at this experience I had, I just feel like things would have been right if this kind of activity is decriminalized. I just feel like that's the way things should go. But with my timing and just unluckiness, I was subjected to a night in jail. It is what it is, I guess. But make sure to give this a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Thank you again for 25,000 subscribers. It's a big milestone, and this is a big story to go with it. And as of making this, we got 2 other specials to catch up on, so stay tuned for those. But it's been someone that's no one, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.